All right, welcome back to another episode of Called to Parent, the Lux Digital Church podcast made just for parents. This week, this month is a new host. It's me, Druzy. I'm back with my wife, Emily. Say hi to the people, Em.
Hey guys. I feel like we just did this, but it also feels like it's been like a year since we did it. So
it does.
Time is weird.
Time is weird. And when we're working on all this awesome Lux Kids stuff, it has been so busy. But yes, it really does feel like it's been a freaking long time since the last time we've been on Jen's podcast.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be back. I'm glad that we get to be back. And this month, I guess we're talking about identity, which is exciting.
Yeah, it's a topic that I think a lot of people in the world, no matter if you're Christian or not, really talk a lot about. It's a hot button topic. Yeah. So I was kind of nervous when I saw this was our chapter because I was like, I've been a pastor a long time and it's something we've talked about a lot, but it's just such a hot topic that sometimes people treat it differently and think about it differently. So excited to see and talk about it today when it comes to the idea of identity and parenting and with our kids.
Yeah, I think we have a quote here from the book that kind of sums up the chapter pretty well, but it says, if you're not resting as a parent in your identity in Christ, you will look for identity in your children. And I think that can definitely be true that, as a parent, it's easy to get lost in the shuffle and to kind of focus your identity on in being in your children and their success and how they do, which this chapter really dives into and helps to kind of filter through.
Totally. Yeah. And this chapter as a whole just really, really hits that point of, man, your identity needs to be in Christ first, not your children. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I was in youth ministry. We were in youth ministry for a long time. Yeah. Kids ministry, youth ministry. And this was the topic that I felt was the hardest sometimes as a pastor or a biblical teacher trying to come alongside parents, because time and time again, this was a topic that I don't know why my kids don't love Jesus. And this was the topic that I felt like we pointed people to. Or I feel like a lot of time
too, we would hear parents that were putting a lot of stock in their kids doing well in the sport that they loved growing up, or wanting their kids to excel in academics or all these different things. And they would get really frustrated when their kids wouldn't, do well as they expected them to. And I think it's because they were putting a lot of stock and value into their kids, really doing well in these things that they placed as high priority, which can also be part of putting your identity in your kids and how they succeed and how they do in different areas of life.
Yeah, I feel like we saw this time and again. Personally, we just a reminder, we have 4 kids. So 12, let me see if I got this right. 12, 10, 8, and 3. So a good range of things or ages. And we've not really gotten into a lot of the activity stage. We've done youth ministry with our son, and we've done basketball and esports with our kids and a couple other things, but we've not really seen this be something that our family has really struggled with from an activity standpoint. But here in America, activities kind of become so many families' identity. Yeah. And we see this, and it's not this podcast is not here to shame. It's more of to help us point out some things that God is calling us to as parents, to go back to that kind of main idea that be an ambassador for Christ, right? We want to be ambassadors for Christ for our kids. However, man, the world has such a way of helping us drift away from the things of God, and it's identity where we get drifting a lot. It's like you mentioned, it's hobbies, it's activities, it's things that we have passion for. Yeah.
And they're not bad things.
No, they're really good things. I grew up doing so many things, right? You grew up doing, what was all the things you were in growing up?
I did drama club for a little bit. I did cheerleading. I was very involved with youth group and serving at church, that kind of stuff, which, none of those things are bad things, but it's when the pressure can be put on those things that I think that's when things start to get a little wishy-washy.
Yeah, for me too. I remember certain times where I just was so busy with sports and arts and all of the things. And it's really easy to get lost in the sauce in the mix of that and not really have my eyes focused on Jesus. And this is the same thing for adults, right? We put our identity in our work. We put our identity in just our parenting, our marriage, all these different things. And we lose sight of who Christ is and what he's called us to. And that's kind of this whole chapter. We're going to talk a little bit more about this. But Paul David Tripp wrote this amazing book called The 14 Gospel Principles of Parenting that'll radically change your parenting, something like that along those lines. Close enough. But if you've never listened to our podcast before, that's essentially, we've been using that book as a guideline. We love the book. It's been a great resource to our marriage and our parenting, but also now to the other pastors and their parenting. Really grateful for that. All three of our pastors and their wives have been on this podcast, kind of giving our own views on each chapter. And as we've been talking about this book, we've been working through different things. So this chapter on identity has been just a very great through line of everything that we've been learning. We've been talking about grace. We've been talking about all these different things. But today in this chapter, I really love the way that Paul talks about identity. He breaks it down kind of into vertical and horizontal identity. Emily, you want to kind of give us an idea of what that is and what that looks like?
Yeah. So I appreciate that he talks about how we can't look horizontally for our identity, meaning if we're looking for our identity in things of the world, we're never going to be satisfied because the world is broken. The world is not perfect. Every good thing in creation is designed to point us back to God and to help us to see him. But ultimately, we should be looking for our identity vertically, which is in God.
So like that horizontal things we look at is very much like what we just talked about, right? It's our possessions, it's our accomplishments. It could be our career, it could be our spouse, it could be our children, it could be the things we own, our home, whatever. The list kind of goes on in that. Yeah. But that vertical, like what's the problem when we look at that horizontal for our identity?
It's broken and it's dysfunctional because that's how creation is. Unfortunately, that's part of the fall is that we lost that perfection that God had created and intended for things to be. And so when we're looking horizontally, when we're looking at our job, sometimes you get fired from your job and then the career you were expecting is gone. If you're looking for it in your spouse isn't perfect. So you're going to be let down. You're going to be disappointed. If you're looking for it in your possessions, then you're never going to have enough of what you think you need to have to satisfy what your identity is and what it is that you're looking for. God alone is what can give us that fulfillment and that sense of identity because he is the one who's created us.
Yeah, I love that. It's that those things, those horizontal things were never meant to give us meaning and purpose. They can't satisfy your heart if I'm catching what you're saying, and they can't give us peace. Yep. It's every good thing in creation is designed to point us to who? Jesus, to God alone, right? To be able to give us that identity, that peace, that meaning that our heart ultimately seeks. Yeah, I love that. Do you have any more on that topic?
No, I think that flows well into our parenting too, though, because when if we're seeking our identity horizontally, that's going to flow into how our parenting is. And that's going to really push us to prioritize things that are what we're valuing, what we're finding our identity in. And that can put a lot of pressure onto our kids to also be successful in those things when we need to be looking at us finding our identity in Christ and then helping our kids find their identity in Christ as well.
I love that. Yeah, that's man, that's a hard topic for you. Have you ever felt that pressure to find identity in how our kids, behave, perform, what they do?
I think that this is something that really early on in our parenting journey that I definitely felt that way of trying to portray this perfect life. On social media, I only wanted to post the good things, the things that made us look like we all had our stuff together when obviously, like we're human. None of us have everything together perfectly. Yeah. We're all a little bit of a hot mess. But I remember that there was a moment in my parenting. I don't remember what triggered it or what happened, but I very specifically remember there was a time that I realized how dangerous it could be to only look for that, like to portray myself in that way, and that could really forced me to put that pressure onto our kids to always be perfect and always be successful. And I had this kind of like pause where I was like, I don't want to only share the perfect things. I don't want to only focus on having the perfect things portrayed in our kids. And I don't necessarily need to care as much about what other people think about our kids. I want our kids to be respectful. I want our kids to be kids that are honoring to God, but I don't want it to be just because I want other people to think that we're perfect. So I had this mental shift early on that I was going to try to be real in my parenting and not care as much about what other people were thinking.
Yeah, I know. I love that because that's something you've challenged me a lot in. I don't think I struggle with this idea of identity. There's plenty of chapters in this book. We both talked about that. There's plenty of chapters in this book and things we have talked about, even things that you and I haven't talked about that maybe Annie and Jenna or Mark and Jen have talked about that are struggles for us when it comes to our parenting.
Yeah.
Identity is one that I think both of us, because of where we grew up and how we grew up, I don't think this is one that we've been lost too much in. I also think that I was deeply challenged early on in my ministry as a pastor by a man named Charles Stanley when he was talking about his son, Andy, who were both pastors.
Right.
Charles was talking about how one time his like admin assistant, I'm probably going to butcher this story, but his admin assistant had basically started talking to other people about how Andy was acting his son. And Charles called it out and said, hey, like, I'm his dad. You're not going to put this on my son and say this is who he is.
Yeah.
He's a kid. He's messing up all of these things, but like, he's my kid. Let me worry about how I parent my kid. You parent yours, basically.
Yeah.
Like,
I think there is an added pressure to pastors' kids, quote unquote. We talk about, people, the whole world talks about, oh, you're a PK. That means you're going to be this rebel, and there's added pressure to that. And so I think that that's something that we really early on made it a point to not put that added pressure for our kids to be perfect, because they're not perfect. They're still learning how to follow Christ. They're still learning just as much as we are.
Yeah. And there's that element that all parents, not even just pastors, could think of, but like there's an element of all families where we feel a certain level of our kids need to be presenting this way, especially out in public, right? Like we want them to be the kid that stands on stage that everyone claps for because they got first place in that thing, right?
Yeah.
Or we want them when we go out to eat to be the perfect ones that sit there and all the sweet old people walk by and they're like, your kids are so well behaved.
Little angels.
They're little angels. Like we want that. We desire that to some extent. Maybe you don't. Maybe that's not a thing. But like most parents I've talked to want that. So I kind of started a little bit early on, kind of want that perfect thing. But at the same time, very quickly, and I appreciate this about your heart, is God put it on your heart. And when God puts something on your heart, you're pretty adamant about making sure I hear it and live it out. So that was something we talked a lot about before. It was like, hey, just because our kids are, pastors' kids, just because our kids are your kids, doesn't mean they need to be perfect and they don't need to live up to something. Their identity needs to be in Jesus, not you or this idea that you have. And ultimately, I think I liked this chapter a lot because Paul is talking about a counseling session with a lady and her son. I believe it was Sally and Jamie.
I think
something like that. And talking about how Sally had put so much pressure on Jamie. And in it, Jamie ultimately...
There was a day that he skipped his like violin lesson and then was gone and didn't show back up at home until 10 p.m. And she was freaking out on him and got really upset. And he went on to say like that he never got a moment of rest because there was so many activities and so many things and pressure that she was putting on him that he felt like he was just go, 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 go and never got time to just rest. And it ultimately was that she was, putting her identity in him being successful and in him doing all these things that would, make her look like she was doing a good job as a parent.
Yeah, that's the hard part, right? I love Paul talks about that desire for successful children. And we kind of already said this, but I want to return back to it because I appreciate this idea. The desire for successful children is a good thing that has become a bad thing for many of us because it's become a ruling thing. It causes us as parents to do things that ultimately crush and embitter our children, all in the name of something good. It's that idea that, too much good things can actually be a bad thing if not pointed in the right direction, right?
I related to that, not in our kids, but me as a kid. My parents put a lot of pressure on me being academically successful and making sure that I was getting straight A's, that I was in all of these high level classes and everything. And it really burnt me out on education to where by the time I was a senior, I hated school and I didn't care about it. And I still did well because, and we'll talk about this a little bit later too, but I was worried that I would disappoint them. And there is that like feeling of being guilty if I didn't do what they wanted me to do, if I didn't live up to their expectations. But I didn't enjoy it. And I think that that's a pretty miserable spot to put our kids into, is to where they are miserable and hating what they're doing and not enjoying the things that they're involved in.
Yeah. When it comes to our kids, I think you always learn a little bit from the previous generation, right? I think all of us parents that are listening to this, or even us talking, you learn a lot from your parents, and a lot of it's really good. A lot of it's so good. I could think back to so many things that really were very beneficial. Even if they weren't Christian things, they were just moral things that God has used for his good, right? But there's a lot of things that I think we want to change in certain ways, or maybe just refine. We'll just say it that way, right? But this one specifically has been one that you and me have been like, because a lot of your upbringing have really, really tried to get right, so to say, or really on it, not get right on our own, but like really give to God.
Yeah.
We were talking about this last night, but like when it comes to identity with our kids, I forgot the exact way you said it. I loved the way you said it. I wish I could have like recorded it, but correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure what you said, and this is our heart, so I know this.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we just want our kids to love Jesus. And we want them to find something that they're passionate about that they could use for his glory.
Yeah.
I don't care what that looks like. I need them to be good citizens. I need them to not be doofuses.
Which it's under the assumption that if they're loving Christ, that they're probably going to be doing the things that are good.
Correct.
Of the world, so to say.
Correct. We homeschool our kids, right? So like there's always those memes and tropes and all of those things, but like I want our kids to be good students. I want them to understand English and understand math and science and all these things. But all of that ultimately is meaningless without Jesus. Like I need them to know 5 + 5 = 11. I'm just kidding. 5 + 5 = 10.
Bible college math.
Bible college math. No, I need them to know these things, right? I want them to know these things. Society needs them to know these things. However, ultimately, I don't want their identity to be in how good they are at math or science or any of these things. I want their identity to be in Jesus and who he's called them to be.
I think a lot of that has affected how, like that idea has affected how we parent though too. And that a lot of times, you might say like, oh, I want my kids to be nice to their siblings. I want them to be kind to their siblings. But we really started shifting our verbiage and how we were thinking about that too. When we are honoring and loving to other people, that's honoring and loving to God. Jesus says the greatest commandment is to love God and love people. So that kind of, thinking about it in that aspect, that we want them to be loving to people, because when we're loving to people, then we're going to be loving to God. And I think that can flow a lot into the identity things, to where we don't care as much about how well they do in math and stuff, but we do care about that. The Bible tells us that we should do everything as if we're doing it for Christ. And so when we have that mindset, then we're going to be doing things to the best of our ability because we're doing it to honor God. And so it really kind of transitions it from not just thinking about doing things good to be good in the world's eyes, but to go back to that vertical and horizontal idea that we're trying to live a life that is finding our identity vertically in God, and that we're wanting to be honoring to God in all the things that we do.
And don't get me wrong, I want my kids to be successful. I want them, if they're competing in something, if you know anything about me, I want them to get first place, right? Like I want them to win. I want them to be able to like hold up a trophy at the end of the day. But if they lose, my number one question always is this, like, hey, did you give your all for Jesus? Did you have fun doing it?
Yeah.
And what can you learn?
Yeah.
Because that's life, right? Like you are going to give your best, hopefully, in everything you do. And sometimes when you give your best, guess what? There's somebody that's better equipped at whatever that is that's going to beat you out. And that's okay. My identity is not in that thing, but my identity being vertical means that I live differently. And it means it drives my passions, my desires, how hard I work, what I do in life, everything. If my vertical identity is where it needs to be, meaning that I look at Jesus the way I need to look at, and I'm trying to serve him in every single way, then I'm going to do things differently. I'm going to live differently. And that's really where I love this topic of identity, is because I want our kids, I want myself. I love this chapter too, because it was very much like, hey, maybe you shouldn't look so much at your kids and you should look at yourself.
Yeah.
Like I want myself, you, my wife, I want my kids to love Jesus.
Yeah.
And if they're loving Jesus and they're doing what he says, then they're going to get this right.
Yeah.
Like they're going to get this right. And guess what? If they don't, they're going to fall down, and we're going to say, hey, get back up. We're going to keep walking.
Where that grace comes in.
That's where grace. It's an amazing. I think that was a chapter we taught last time, right? Like that was the most important chapter, I think. But this identity piece is huge.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the final thing here. Like, how do we know if this is something we're struggling with? How do we know if this is something, if we're putting our identity on our shoulders of our children too much? Paul, I believe, uses five different versions of like telltale signs. You want to go over like the first one? We'll kind of go back and forth.
So the first one he has in there is that you have too much focus on success. Obviously, like we've said, everyone wants their kids to do well, wants their kids to be good, quote unquote, on the things that they're doing. But when that becomes your only focus, when you're only, caring about how well they're doing, ultimately you're going to be let down, because your kid isn't going to be perfect at everything. They're kids, and they're humans. None of us are perfect, right? And that can also put a lot of stress on them, that they feel like they are only valuable if they're succeeding. So I think it's important to not remember, or not to only need for your kids to succeed, but to not focus so much on that.
Yeah. And the second one was too much concern about reputation, right? When we care too much about reputation, we know we've put our identity in the horizontal. This one can't be repeated enough. It's that thing that we need to write down and just keep in front of our heads all the time, that God didn't give us our children to build our reputation, but to publicly proclaim his name and his reputation. Our children are also ambassadors of Christ, right? Like we want them to live that way. Our children weren't there to make our name known. Like we didn't have children to make our name known. It's that vertical identity like piece to this. It's not about us. It's about him. Yeah.
The third one is that you have too great a desire for control. There can be a very, very big difference between exercising proper parental authority over your children, which I know Jen and Mark kind of touched on this last week, that, God has placed us in that position of authority for our children. But we're not supposed to be controlling over their lives. We're not the ones that are, trying to make every decision for them. We're not trying to force them to do exactly. They're not robots. We're not trying to program them to do X, Y, Z just as we want them to do. And if you're having a hard time with that, then that might be an indicator that you're putting too much of your value and your identity in how your kids are.
That's good. Yeah. The fourth one, if I remember right, Paul really focuses heavily kind of on the gospel, like the gospel message. It's too much emphasis. Yikes. Can't say that word. Too much emphasis on doing rather than being. parental struggle with success, reputation, and control, in the midst of all of that, we could begin to lose sight of what actually is the greatest value to the one we represent. Paul actually asks us to think about this. He says, God really did harness all of the forces of the natural world and direct all of the various events of human history so that his son would come and by his life, death, and resurrection rescue us from all of this. Like, God did something radical, life altering, so we wouldn't have to continue to look to horizontal things. Instead, we could look to vertical. He even asked this question, what you and your children, he says this thing, what you and your children need is not the glory of personal achievement, but rescue from your bondage to self-glory so that you can enjoy the freedom of living for the glory of another, meaning the Father.
Yeah, I like that he points it back to being about redemption in that section, that it's not about success. It's about finding redemption in Jesus.
So good.
So the fifth and final one that he talks about is too much temptation to make it personal. I think a lot of times it's easy to think that our kids are purposely doing things because they're trying to annoy us or drive us crazy or upset us. Sometimes they might. Sometimes our kids will sit there.
Sometimes they're evil masterminds that are like, whoa, let's screw with dad.
But I think for the most part, we have to.
I broke you. I like that.
Oh my goodness. But yeah, so I think it's important that we don't think that our kids are out to intentionally hurt us, that they're not trying to go against us for the most part. I'm sure sometimes they are.
Sometimes the basement feels like an evil lair that you come down there and they're like, hide the plans. But no, I get what you're saying. Yeah. Too much temptation to make it personal.
Yeah. But you might, walk in on a mess that your kids have made and be like, oh, why would you do this to me? Like, why, after, I do all this to take care of the house and to do this, and this is what you do. And it's kind of that guilt trip that you might be putting on them.
Yeah. Jen and Mark talked a lot about that last time, right?
Yeah. But it can feel that way sometimes. And we have to remember that, for one, they're kids. They're still trying to figure things out. They're still trying to learn things. They're also still sinners. We've joked since our kids were babies that they're dirty, rotten sinners. All of us are.
Yeah.
But
they need Jesus.
Yeah, they need Jesus. And I think that when we try to put that pressure on them, that they need to be perfect and that they can't do anything against us, for one, it's losing out on the grace side of parenting, that we're trying to make it into this thing that it's not, and we're not having grace in those moments. But I think that we're also then losing out on some of the freedom that God has given us in parenting, to kind of loosen some of that stress that we might have in trying to say that they're doing this against us. They're not doing it against us. We don't need to put that added feeling into it.
Yeah, we lose sight often of what is of God and what's our personal feelings. Mm-hmm. That's something, we joke about it, but we actually did do that. Like, I remember when Ezra was in his crib, and I would just preach the gospel over him. Like, hey, bud, like, you're a sinner and you need God, and dad and mom are going to continue to preach that to you. And I actually was talking to one of new parents at Lux about that. Him and his wife just had their little baby girl, and I was like, dude, start preaching the gospel to him now. Mm-hmm. Like, they have no clue what the words are, but get in the habit, build a rhythm as a parent to point your kids to Jesus. Mm-hmm. It seems really weird, but it's small rhythms that are done intentionally that create habits and honestly point people to a vertical identity that they need to have in Jesus. Mm-hmm. There's this question at the end that I like from Paul in the end of the chapter as we kind of wrap up. He said, could it be the tension that has been caused in your relationship to your children because you have tended to personalize what is not personal? About that topic we just talked about. Like, man, you have caused so much trouble in your household, more than you know, pointing your kids as the problem when really it is potentially a you problem. Mm-hmm. And that's that freedom that you're talking about found in Jesus, that we don't have to be perfect parents. Mm-hmm. We don't have to try to do all the right things, but also realize your kids aren't perfect too, right? Like, who cares what other people say? Yeah. It's about what God thinks of you. It's about what your spouse and you like talk about and agree on. Yeah. It's about, no matter where you're at If you're a single parent, like it's about what God says about you. It's not what the moms on Instagram that put their comments or the dads at the ballpark or wherever it's at. Like it's about Jesus. So that's it. That's all we got for you. You got any last closing thoughts on identity?
I don't think so.
Awesome.
That's it.
As this is the podcast going out for Christmas, want to welcome all of you to the Lux podcast once again, but also Merry stinking Christmas.
And Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year. And I hope you and your family, no matter what your family looks like, no matter your dynamic, know this, that Jesus cares so deeply for you, and he has called you and raised you to be an ambassador for Christ. So go tell your family all about Jesus, and also realize, hey, you don't have to be perfect. God is with you, and he has called you to do something. Guess what? When he calls you, he's going to equip you. So trust him in that. It's going to be a great time. We love you as always. It's going to be awesome. Next time is Andy and Jenna with the next chapter, which is going to be fantastic because theirs was hilarious last time.
It's a good time.
It's always a good time. Hey, we love you at Lux. We love you, parents. Hope you have a blessed time and day.